day the Crain family first entered Hill House, they believed they were moving into an old mansion that needed to be renovated before they could sell it. But by the time they leave, one of them would be dead, another would spend years struggling with addiction, another would become obsessed with controlling death, and all 5 children would carry the memory of that house into adulthood. But the worst part was that the family never truly escaped Hill House. It all begins in 1992 when Hugh and Olivia Crain arrive at Hill House with their 5 children, Stephen, Shirley, Theo, Luke, and Nell. The house had been abandoned and Hugh and Olivia planned to restore it, sell it, and use the money to build their forever home. The work, however, takes much longer than expected, forcing the entire family to stay inside the mansion while the renovations continue. The only people who regularly cared for the property are Mr. and Mrs. Dudley, who live nearby, but surprisingly refused to stay at the house after dark. From the beginning, the house felt wrong. Nell and Luke, the 2 youngest children, were twins and shared a bedroom, but Nell is repeatedly haunted by nightmares involving a woman with a broken neck who appears beneath her bed and terrorizes her. Hugh believes that Nell is simply having nightmares, but her visions keep returning. At the same time, another part of the house has captured the children's attention. A red door that remains locked, making Nell and Shirley desperately want to know what's inside it. Mr. Dudley eventually gives them a master key, but even that fails to open the door, leaving the children with no choice but to give up. Luke has his own strange experiences. While sitting in his treehouse, he shows Stephen some drawings which immediately disturb the older brother. Stephen asks Luke where the frightening images come from, and he simply says they come from his bedroom. Yet, despite everything the children are seeing, the adults continue trying to explain it away. One day, while he was spending time in his video game room, he discovers an old vanity. He decides to restore it as a gift for his mother, hoping that giving her something nice will cheer her up. Since Hugh is too busy to help him find the supplies, Stephen asks Mrs. Dudley where he can find some paint. She not only knows where the paint is, but also recognizes the vanity. She explains that it belonged to a woman named Poppy who was married to William Hill, the man who originally owned the house. She also explains that Poppy and William had met in an insane asylum, and that Poppy had struggled with mental illness throughout her life. Then one fateful night, Hugh wakes Stephen and tells him that they have to remain completely quiet. The father and son hide inside Stephen's bedroom while something moves outside. The doorknob begins to turn, and whatever is on the other side is enough to terrify Hugh. Eventually, the movement stops and Hugh picks up Stephen and tells him to close his eyes and not look at anything. But something chases them, forcing Hugh to run from the house with him.
Closed.
Outside, Hugh gathers all 5 children and puts them into the car. The children immediately ask where their mother is, but Hugh refuses to explain. They leave Hill House behind, and Hugh takes the children to a motel before he returns to Hill House to find Olivia. He tells the children that he is going back for their mother and promises that he will return. Once Hugh leaves, the children begin discussing what happened inside the house and try to make sense of everything they have experienced. Eventually, the children go to sleep, but Nell stays awake because she is waiting for Hugh to return. Hours pass by, but when Hugh returns, he is covered in red stains. Nell immediately asks whether he found their mother, and Hugh tells her that he did and adds that she is better now. At this point, the police have arrived, and Hugh tells the children that their aunt should arrive soon. This is the same aunt the children will eventually go to live with after everything that happened at Hill House. Only afterward does the truth become clear. Olivia Crain has died inside the house, and the circumstances make it appear that she ended her own story. The news quickly becomes a local sensation, and suspicion falls on Hugh because people believe he may have killed his wife. Surprisingly, Hugh refuses to sell Hill House. Instead, he decides that the house must remain standing and locked, with only the Dudleys allowed inside.
That doesn't make any sense.
The Dudleys stay on, and it sits there and rots.
26 years later, the Crain children have become adults, but the family has never recovered from that night. Stephen, the oldest of them all, has become a successful writer who specializes in stories about haunted places. The first major book that launched his career was about the Hill House. Stephen, however, has convinced himself that the supernatural experiences his siblings describe were products of their imaginations. His skepticism is so strong that even when other people tell him horrifying stories, he searches for rational explanations. One woman asks Stephen to investigate the room where she saw her dead husband hanging from the ceiling. She claims that after his death, she began hearing car horns and feeling water drops fall onto her face while she slept.
And there he was, hanging there, upside down.
While Stephen is investigating the woman's story, his younger sister Nell repeatedly tries to contact him. She first calls Stephen, then Shirley, but neither of them answers the call. Shirley is busy running the funeral home where she works, and Theo, another one of the Crain children, lives in Shirley's guest house. Nell eventually calls their father Hugh in the middle of the night and asks whether he remembers the woman with the broken neck. Hugh remembers immediately. Nell tells him that the woman has returned. Hugh asks where Nell is and tells her to go to Stephen's house so he can meet her there the next day. But Nell isn't at home. She is sitting outside Hill House. After ending the call, she enters the mansion and finally goes into the red room that had been locked when she was a child. At exactly 3 minutes past 3 in the morning, all of the Crain siblings wake up.
Now he's in the red room.
Later, Stephen returns to his apartment and discovers Luke fleeing from there. He has taken some of Stephen's belongings, which include a camera and an iPad. Stephen is angry and confused about how Luke found him, but Luke looks terrible and claims he needs help. Stephen eventually gives him money in exchange for the iPad and tells him to leave. But when Stephen enters his apartment, he discovers Nell standing inside. Before he can understand why she is there, Hugh calls him to let him know that Nell is dead.
She's dead.
Shirley is the next member of the family whose story comes into focus. She has built a life around death by running a funeral home, and she is remarkably comfortable dealing with bodies and grieving families. She can calmly explain to children why their dead relatives are placed in open caskets, and she treats the work as something she can control. As a child at Hill House, Shirley was already protective and nurturing. She wanted to spend time with Nell, and while exploring the property, she discovered a small cemetery and then heard crying sounds from inside a shed. Inside was a box containing several newborn kittens. She adopts them and learns how to feed the little ones. But the next day, discovers that one of them has died. The kitten becomes Shirley's first experience with death. She helps bury it with her parents while her mother comforts her by explaining that everyone eventually becomes a story. Shirley delivers a heartfelt eulogy, but the strange events of Hill House quickly twist the moment into something horrifying. Olivia had also begun experiencing strange dreams and visions, although at this point neither Hugh nor the children fully understood what was happening to her. Fast forward to the present day, one of Shirley's clients brings in a purple box, and the sight of it immediately unsettles her, because it reminds her of the box that had been used for the kitten. While Shirley is dealing with the family, she notices a man sitting nearby and drinking a cocktail. She does not react with surprise, suggesting that seeing things other people cannot see is quite familiar to her. Around this time, Luke enters rehab for the first time. Luke's struggles become another source of tension between the siblings, particularly because they have spent a huge sum of money for his rehab and spent years watching him relapse. One night, Shirley goes to sleep and dreams about Hill House. Shirley and Theo are suddenly confronted by strange noises coming from the walls. They hear loud banging, and the sound becomes increasingly frightening. When their father arrives, he tries to reassure them that it's just the old rusting pipes, but Shirley is not convinced. Her dream breaks when she gets a call from Stephen. To her horror, he informs her that Nell has passed away. The news is heartbreaking, but still, she insists on taking control of the funeral arrangements. When Nell's body arrives, Shirley approaches the body bag but hesitates before opening it. Eventually, she unzips the bag and looks at Nell. Shirley has spent years restoring the bodies of strangers, but this time the person lying in front of her is her own sister. The sight brings her excruciating pain, but she does not turn away. Instead, Shirley begins the process of restoring Nell's appearance. While she works, memories of her childhood flood her mind, including the moment when she first saw Olivia after death. Initially, she was frightened to confront the dead body, but when Shirley saw her face, she was amazed to find her mother fixed. Now, years later, she is doing the same thing for Nell, but after a few minutes, something horrible happens. Bouncing back from her hallucination, she completes her work and Nell is now prepared. But before Shirley can leave the room, something even more terrifying happens. Shirley's connection to death is not the only thing the family inherited from Hill House. Theo has her own haunting experiences. One night while she was sleeping, she feels someone embracing her from behind. From that day onwards, she can feel what others can't. Theo discovered that she could learn things about objects simply by touching them. At first, she did not understand how she knew these things. Her father would give her objects while cleaning the house, and she would immediately sense something about their history. One day, Hugh gives her a box and tells her that it is trash. But when Theo touches it, she realizes that it is valuable. Sure enough, when Hugh opens the box, he is shocked to find that it contains an expensive wine bottle. While playing with Luke, Theo touches a pillow and suddenly knows that it was once used as a sick bed. She cannot explain how she knows this, but the information simply comes to her through touch.
This was a sick bed. How do you know?
Later, Luke is playing near the dumbwaiter when Mrs. Dudley warns him and advises him to stay away from it. That night, Luke returns to the dumbwaiter despite the warning. He believes it would make a perfect elevator for children and asks Theo to help him. Luke climbs inside and she activates it, but instead of going upwards, the dumbwaiter begins descending. It takes him down into a basement that the family did not know existed. He is terrified and Theo immediately tries to bring him back up, but before she can, he shines his flashlight into the darkness and sees something frightening. Hugh and Olivia somehow manage to bring the dumbwaiter back up and Luke shows them his torn shirt. He claims to have been attacked by something inside the basement, but his parents brush it off as his imagination. Theo, on the other hand, believes in Luke. She eventually discovers a hidden trapdoor leading into the basement and finds the missing piece of Luke's shirt. When she touches it, she realizes that Luke was telling the truth about what happened to him. Theo takes the evidence to her mother, and the family is forced to accept that Luke had really been inside a hidden basement. Their conclusion is that the bootleggers wanted to keep this as a secret. Hence, they didn't put that bootlegging basement in their blueprints. But the parents still do not believe that Luke was attacked by a supernatural creature. Olivia later speaks privately with Theo about the strange things she has been experiencing. She tells Theo that the ability to sense things through touch may have been passed down through the family. It is revealed that Theo's grandmother had this ability too. Hence, Olivia gives her a pair of gloves to help with it. Theo begins wearing the gloves everywhere, and on the final night at Hill House when Hugh touches her, she suddenly experiences what has happened. The family eventually flees Hill House, but the experience remains with her for years. Fast forward to the present day, Theo has become a child psychologist and is pursuing her PhD. She helps children who have experienced difficult situations. One of her patients is a young girl from foster care who claims that there is a monster living in the basement of her new home. She calls it the Smiley Man. Theo does not immediately find evidence to support the girl's claims, but the story stays with her. That night, Theo wakes up and is startled by the Smiley Man standing right at the foot of her bed. Shortly afterward, Shirley calls Theo and tells her what happened to Nell. She cannot understand why her sister would go into that room and do such a thing, and the news leaves her angry as well as devastated. The next day, however, Theo still cannot stop thinking about the little girl and the Smiley Man. Rather than simply dismissing the case, she decides to investigate the girl's home herself. Theo begins touching things throughout the basement, trying to determine whether she can sense anything connected to the girl's story. At first, none of the objects seem to give her the information she is looking for. But the moment she makes contact with the couch, she experiences what happened to the little girl. She also discovers where the image of the Smiley Man came from. The wood grain in the basement ceiling forms a shape that resembles a smiling face, which explains the creature the girl has been describing. Theo then goes upstairs and she is not wearing her gloves. She shakes the hand of the girl's father and the handshake lasts longer than a normal greeting. Immediately after leaving the house, she contacts DHS. Based on what she has experienced, Theo knows that the little girl has been through a lot. When the man is confronted about what he has done, he folds like a cheap suit. That night, she decides to visit Nell's body in the morgue. Theo approaches her sister's body and touches her. The moment she does, the emotional impact becomes overwhelming. Theo begins crying because she has felt what Nell had experienced before her death. To cope with the trauma, she calls a woman with whom she previously had a sleepover, intending to use the encounter as another way of distracting herself from everything that has happened. The story then shifts to Luke. Luke's story begins during his childhood at Hill House, where he is constantly frustrated because nobody believes the things he claims to see. His family assumes that many of his experiences are simply products of his imagination, including his imaginary friend Abigail. But Abigail is not the only strange figure Luke encounters inside the house. During the family's stay at Hill House, Olivia is going through some of the old belongings and relics in the house when they come across a bowler hat. Luke immediately wants it, and when he puts it on, Hugh asks him whether he likes the hat. Nell quickly answers that he loves it, and when Hugh asks how she knows that, Nell explains that it is a twin thing. Because she and Luke are twins, they share a special connection that allows them to sense certain things about each other. That night, Luke is sleeping in his bedroom when he hears something moving outside. He becomes curious and takes a peek. To his horror, he finds a huge man moving through the house. But the most disturbing part is that the man appears to be floating above the ground. A terrified Luke quickly hides underneath his bed. But the man is not wandering around randomly. He is searching for something, and eventually he finds what he came looking for. It is Luke's new bowler hat. Luke, who is still hiding under his bed, runs out of breath and lets out a small gasp. The encounter becomes another frightening memory from his childhood, and just as Nell has the mysterious woman with the broken neck haunting her, Luke now has the man in the bowler hat. Fast forward to the present, Luke is living inside a treatment facility, and for once, things seem to be going better for him. Soon the facility announces lights out. Joey has to return to her room, leaving Luke alone. That same night, Nell dies. Luke suddenly wakes up at exactly 3 minutes past 3 in the morning. He is clutching his neck, and standing in front of him is Nell.
Go.
The next morning, Luke discovers that Joey has left the treatment facility. The director and some of the other people there tell him that this is exactly why people in treatment should not become too attached to each other. Luke returns to his room and notices that there is a note underneath his pillow. It is from Joey, and it contains a simple warning telling him not to come after her. But Luke ignores it. He follows his instincts and climbs out through a window before setting off to find Joey. Luke believes he knows where Joey has gone. He waits for her on a park bench, and eventually that night Joey arrives. Unfortunately, she has relapsed after staying clean for 9 months. He immediately tries to help her and contacts the treatment facility, hoping they will allow Joey to return. But they deny her re-entry. From their perspective, Joey left the facility voluntarily, and therefore she has to deal with the consequences herself. And the same rule applies to Luke. With nowhere else to go, Luke tells Joey that he will help her. He explains that she helped him get clean, and now he wants to do the same for her. He believes he can find enough money to get them a motel room where they can stay together while she tries to get sober again. The two of them head towards Steven's house, as Luke plans to ask him for some money. When they reach the house, Luke rings the doorbell expecting to find Steven, but instead he finds Steven's soon-to-be ex-wife. Luke has been in treatment and did not know that Steven and his wife had separated. He reminisces about a day 2 months earlier when the two of them had visited the house for dinner. That dinner had already revealed how damaged Luke's relationship with Steven had become. Luke had disappointed Steven so many times in the past that Steven no longer believed his promises about sobriety. At present, Steven's wife does not give Luke any money, but she does give him Steven's new address. Luke goes there and begins rummaging through the drawers and finds an old camera and an iPad. He grabs it and heads downstairs, but before he can go further, Steven catches him. Steven eventually gives Luke $200 in exchange for the iPad and camera. Luke takes the money and leaves. He gives the $200 to Joey, and they plan to use it to get a motel room together. But before they can reach the motel, she asks him to wait while she goes to relieve herself in a dark alley. But even after a few minutes have passed, she does not return. His fear finally comes true. Joey has relapsed. Now Luke is left alone without the $200 and without the person for whom he had left treatment. To make matters worse, the man in the bowler hat is still following him. Luke spends the rest of the night searching through different shanty towns, hoping to find Joey, but he has no luck. Unfortunately, next morning, a group of street thugs jump on him. They beat him up, take his money, and even steal his shoes. Now Luke has nothing. He is exhausted, frightened, and has nowhere else to go. So he calls the treatment facility again and begs them for another bed and insists that he has not relapsed. The woman from the treatment facility advises him to stay where he is and promises that they will come to get him. While waiting, Luke tries to calm himself using a technique he developed when he was a child. He begins counting to 7, repeating the numbers as a way of making himself feel safe. But the man in the bowler hat begins approaching him. He gets closer and closer. Luke turns around, but instead of seeing the man in the bowler hat, he sees his mother. Soon, Stephen and the woman from the treatment facility have arrived to collect Luke. With a broken heart, Stephen tells him that their dear sister has died, but Luke struggles to process what Stephen just said and then rejects it. Now the story focuses on Nell, who had a terrifying encounter with the bent-neck lady the very first night on the mansion. Nell is terrified by what she sees, but her parents believe that she simply had a nightmare. One night, Nell decides to sleep on the couch instead, while her mother, Olivia, stays nearby to keep her company. Before going to sleep, Nell notices the locket Olivia is wearing and asks whether she can have it someday. Inside the locket is a picture of Nell and Luke, emphasizing the special connection the twins share. Nell eventually falls asleep while Olivia remains beside her, but sometime during the night, Olivia wakes up and returns to her own bedroom. Once Nell is alone again, the bent-neck lady appears. Nell becomes completely frozen and cannot move as the mysterious figure approaches her.
I'm frozen. I can't talk.
The experience is not simply another nightmare. It is the beginning of the sleep paralysis that will continue following Nell even after she grows up. A few days later, Nell is exploring the house when she discovers a tea set. She takes it to Mrs. Dudley and asks whether she can keep it. Mrs. Dudley seems to recognize the tea set and explains that it belonged to the previous owners of the house. But when Olivia enters the room, she immediately becomes angry. Someone has written the name Nell on the wall, and Olivia assumes that Nell herself wrote it. She repeatedly denies doing it, but the writing seems like obvious evidence against her. She orders Nell and Theo to clean the writing from the wall before walking away. But when Theo begins pulling away some of the wallpaper, she discovers that the writing is much more disturbing than they first realized. As an adult, Nell continues suffering from sleep paralysis and eventually seeks professional help because she wants to find a way to stop it. During this period, Nell meets the man who will eventually become her husband. Unlike the people around her who have dismissed her experiences as nightmares or imagination, he actually listens to what she has to say. He takes her fears seriously, and this becomes extremely important to Nell. The two begin spending time together, eventually going out for coffee and falling in love. After he enters her life, the woman with the broken neck stops appearing to her. The only particularly frightening thing that happens during her wedding is that Nell briefly sees her mother. They get married, and for a while Nell's life finally seems to be moving in a better direction. For the first time in years, Nell is able to live without constantly being haunted by the figure that has terrified her since childhood. But that changes 8 months after her marriage. One night, Nell suffers another episode of sleep paralysis and her husband wakes up to help her. But before he can do anything, his neck suddenly jerks violently to one side. The doctors determine that he suffered a brain aneurysm. To everyone else, his death has a medical explanation, but Nell does not accept it. She had seen the woman with the broken neck that night, and she becomes convinced that the figure is somehow responsible for her husband's death. She begins struggling to sleep again and eventually starts seeing another psychologist. But this doctor does not believe her claims about the woman with the broken neck. Nell is prescribed medication, but the pills do not solve the problems she is experiencing. Theo arrives shortly afterward because she wants to spend time with Nell. Nell asks Theo to use her ability to determine whether her dead husband is still present. She agrees to touch a pillow, but she gets nothing from it. Nell then asks her to touch the place where her husband died, and Theo immediately loses her temper. She reminds Nell that her husband is dead and death is painful, but the family has to move forward. The confrontation leaves Nell even more isolated. Once again, the people closest to her refuse to accept what she is experiencing.
I just want to know if he's still here.
He's not.
And that sucks.
Eventually, she books a flight and leaves Massachusetts. When Nell arrives, she decides to stay at the same motel where the children had stayed on the night they left Hill House. During her first night at the motel, Nell falls asleep and experiences another episode of sleep paralysis. But this time, instead of seeing the bent neck lady, she sees Luke. He appears to be in terrible condition, and the sight immediately frightens Nell. Later that day, she goes to the motel's vending machine to get a bottle of water. Once again, the woman with the broken neck appears. Nell rushes back to her room and sits there, trying to process what has happened. Eventually, she comes out of her daze and realizes that it is already too late. Adamant on facing what lies inside the Hill House, she gets into her car and drives to the house. When she arrives, Nell calls her father and tells him about the woman with the broken neck. While she is speaking to him, something happens inside the mansion. The lights turn on, then the porch light begins blinking twice. It was the signal Olivia used to give the family when she wanted them to return home, but instead of leaving, she enters Hill House. Inside, the mansion looks almost exactly the way Nell remembers it from childhood. But now, the house appears to be welcoming her. Her parents and siblings are there, appearing as they did when they were children, and they speak to Nell as though nothing has changed. Nell is eventually brought to her mother, who is standing near the wall where Nell's name had once appeared. To our shock, it is revealed that Olivia was the one who had written the message on the wall. When Nell comes downstairs again, she finds what appears to be her entire bridal party waiting for her. This time, however, the children she remembers from Hill House have grown up. They apologize to her for never believing her. And standing directly behind Luke is Nell's dead husband. Nell approaches him and the two begin dancing together, but what Nell experiences is not what is actually happening. In reality, inside the abandoned and deteriorating Hill House, Nell is dancing alone. Eventually, Nell kisses her husband, but he disappears. Nell then sees Luke's childhood friend, Abigail, along with Luke and Olivia. They invite her to join them for a tea party. As she climbs the stairs, she notices the ropes hanging nearby. Nell reaches for one of the ropes and notices her husband standing at the bottom of the staircase. Then Olivia appears beside her. She takes the locket that Nell had received as a child and places it around her neck, but the locket suddenly changes into a noose. During her final moments, she realizes that the woman with the broken neck was never a separate ghost haunting Nell. It was Nell herself. After Nell's death, the remaining Crain family gathers at Shirley's funeral home for a private viewing. They have all come together to say goodbye to their youngest sister, but the reunion is far from peaceful because the unresolved trauma of their childhood at Hill House continues to hang over them. The family is eventually joined by Hugh. When he enters the funeral home, he initially appears surprisingly composed. He compliments Shirley on the place and tries to behave normally, but as he walks through the corridors of the funeral home, the surroundings begin to blur with the memories of Hill House. The transition happens almost naturally, as though the past and present are overlapping. It was a violent, stormy night, and Nell was nowhere to be found.
Oh, man.
Hugh and Olivia begin searching for her, but as the storm intensifies, something happens to Olivia. She sees an unknown kid moving in a wheelchair. Hugh, meanwhile, becomes increasingly desperate as he searches the corridors. What began as a search for Nell turns into a frantic attempt to find Olivia after she seems to disappear through the maze of hallways. Hugh then sees Olivia standing in front of a large glass window. The window suddenly shatters, appearing to explode directly into her. But when Hugh turns to look again, Olivia is sitting safely on the floor of another hallway.
Jesus Christ!
The parents are then distracted by the sound of their children screaming downstairs. They claim to have seen a huge dog with glowing eyes, but when Hugh searches for it, he finds Nell standing alone, gasping for air. The story returns to the funeral home, where the family is once again confronting the truth about Nell's death. Hugh finally begins to acknowledge the supernatural experiences that have followed the Crain family for years. Stephen refuses to accept the supernatural explanation and continues believing that mental illness is responsible for Olivia and Nell's death. Hugh is devastated by the statement, but before the family can fully process what has been said, something even more shocking happens.
Oh my God, the wrong parent died!
Hugh bends down and kisses Nell on the forehead before quietly leaving the room. Steve and Luke also prepare to leave, but each of them takes one final look at Nell before walking away. As the family starts dealing with the aftermath and discussing the damage, Mr. Dudley mentions that he heard the rain, although the storm Hugh describes seems to have been far more severe than what Dudley experienced. While examining the house, Stephen notices that one of the walls feels strangely soft and squishy. Hugh investigates and discovers that the water damage extends through 3 different levels of the house, eventually reaching all the way down into the basement. He takes a hammer and opens a hole in the wall, and after taking a Polaroid photograph, he confirms that black mold has formed inside the wall. However, the photograph also captures something deeply unsettling. The biggest problem is that Hugh cannot determine where the water is coming from. The family also cannot properly investigate the Red Room because it remains inaccessible, so Hugh considers the possibility that the damage could be coming from there. Hugh rents the necessary equipment and decides that he and Stephen will carry out the work themselves. Olivia agrees to examine the blueprints and try to work out where the water could be entering the house, but when Hugh later looks at what she has been doing, he becomes confused. Instead of marking possible sources of the leak, Olivia has apparently been drawing the shape of the house over and over again across the blueprints. Mr. Dudley notices how strangely Olivia has been behaving and tells Hugh that he thinks she should spend some time away from Hill House. He explains that his parents worked at Hill House, and his mother would sometimes return home in a strangely scattered state. On some occasions, she would simply wander off into the woods and even sleep there. Eventually, he himself began working at Hill House, and later the Hills hired Mrs. Dudley to take care of Mrs. Hill. During their time working there, Mr. and Mrs. Dudley fell in love, and Mrs. Dudley eventually became pregnant. Unfortunately, Mrs. Dudley's baby was stillborn. She often had to work nights, and one night she heard what sounded like a newborn baby crying somewhere inside the house. She searched for the child but could not find anyone. The experience deeply affected her, and as she continued working nights, she also began behaving in the same scattered and strange way that Dudley had previously seen in his own mother. Eventually, Mr. and Mrs. Dudley decided that they would no longer spend nights inside Hill House.
But if you find your missus is acting scattered, then yeah, maybe a little time away would do the trick.
With each passing day, Olivia's behavior becomes even more frightening. That night, Olivia wakes up and finds someone walking outside her bedroom. When she gets up and investigates, she finds Poppy Hill in the same room where Olivia likes to read. She asks Poppy whether she is dreaming, and Poppy tells her that of course she is dreaming because everyone is dreaming. Now Olivia and Poppy are standing inside the twins' bedroom while Nell and Luke are asleep. Poppy asks Olivia what she would do if the twins were having an extremely bad dream, the kind of dream that was so terrible they could not escape it. Olivia says that she would have to wake them up, but Poppy tells her that she has a secret method for waking children from that kind of dream.
'Cause I got a secret. A way to wake them up. A way to keep them safe.
She leans close and whispers something into her ear. Olivia suddenly snaps out of the experience and realizes that she is sitting on top of Hugh with a screwdriver. She repeatedly tells him that she has been having the strangest dreams, and he can no longer ignore how serious the situation has become. Hugh finally suggests that Olivia spend some time away from Hill House and stay with her sister. Olivia agrees, and the following day Hugh returns to work on the water damage. While working, he hears scratching from inside the walls. He begins chiseling out some of the bricks, but when he finally opens the space, he discovers something far more disturbing than rats. Hugh immediately contacts the police and learns that William Hill had disappeared in 1948, and the evidence suggests that he had walled himself inside the house. But the reason for his actions is still unknown. The story then returns to the present, where it is the day of Nell's funeral. At the cemetery, the family gathers around Nell's grave and begins throwing dirt onto the coffin. Luke eventually steps forward and throws some dirt into the grave himself, but when he looks up, he sees the ghost of Nell staring back at him.
Don't.
Stephen grabs Luke and pulls him away. He asks Stephen if he saw what happened, but Stephen tells him that he saw nothing. As the day comes to an end, they realizes that Luke is missing. Shirley immediately becomes worried for Luke. Almost immediately, Hugh and Stephen begin their search for Luke, while the women stay in the funeral home. As they drive towards the area where they believe Luke might be, Hugh tries to make conversation by asking Stephen about his marriage. But the conversation soon turns into an argument when he brings up Olivia's death and says that Hugh should have protected her as well. Having no other choice, Hugh reveals that none of the family members were responsible for her demise. It was in fact the house that preyed on them. Moreover, he never built a tree house for Luke, which means that the tree house appeared out of thin air. Shirley gets notified by her credit card company that Luke had used the card at a nearby gas station. Shirley and Theo start their journey and relay this information to Stephen, who immediately drives to the gas station. They talk with the store owner and are shocked to learn that Luke had bought 6 cans of gasoline, which can only mean that he intends to burn the Hill house. Sure enough, Luke reaches the place, douses the house in gas, but surprisingly, it does not catch fire. To our horror, Olivia appears, distracting Luke while Poppy takes control of his mind. The scene shifts to the fateful day when the children lost their mother. Olivia leaves, but in reality, she is staying in a motel. Later that night, while everyone is sleeping, she returns to Hill House. She goes downstairs into the basement, finds rat poison, and begins mixing the poison into tea. Shirley happens to come downstairs because she is hungry and wants a midnight snack. She sees Olivia in the kitchen and immediately realizes that something is wrong. Shirley therefore goes upstairs and wakes Hugh, telling him that Olivia has returned and is acting bizarrely. Meanwhile, Olivia takes the poisoned tea upstairs to the twins' room. She finds Luke and Nell there, but there is also a little girl sleeping in Luke's bed. It is Abigail. Olivia wakes the children and tells them that they are going to have a tea party in the Red Room. To our shock, the Red Room has opened on its own. The children enter the room with Olivia and she begins preparing the tea party. Meanwhile, Hugh is searching for Olivia and the children, but he cannot reach the Red Room in time to prevent what is about to happen. Abigail dies, but thankfully, Hugh manages to save Luke and Nell by knocking their cups away before they can drink it. Olivia tries to stop him, and in the struggle, she gets hurt. As Hugh gathers the children and prepares to escape, Poppy Hill whispers into Olivia's ear, telling her that Hugh is trying to take the children away from her. While Olivia is distracted, Hugh manages to escape with the children. The terrifying figure that had seemed to be chasing Hugh through the house that night is therefore revealed to be Olivia herself. Once Hugh has escaped, Olivia is left alone inside Hill House, surrounded by ghosts. She begins stumbling through the house and repeatedly tries to convince herself that she needs to wake up. Eventually, she gets up, walks towards the spiral staircase, and ends her story. The scene shifts back to Luke, who is seen lying helplessly on the floor. Poppy has injected him with rat poison and he is foaming from his mouth. Thankfully, Hugh and Stephen reach the Hill House. As they move through the house, they encounter the tall ghost wearing the bowler hat who had previously stalked Luke. They manage to get past him and eventually reach the upper floor where they find the door to the Red Room. But mysteriously, the door opens by itself. Before Stephen can understand what is happening, Poppy touches him and he is pulled into another alternate reality. In this reality, Stephen is speaking with his wife, who is pregnant. She tells him that both his brother and father have died, and Stephen finds himself doing something he never imagined he would do. He is writing a sequel to his book, but the seemingly peaceful reality quickly turns into a nightmare, and Stephen is eventually pulled out of it when Nell appears and touches him. He wakes up, only to find that Shirley and Theo are also unconscious. They have both been affected by Poppy and have been trapped inside their own alternate realities. Theo's reality involves the woman with whom she had a sleepover. To our horror, numerous hands emerge from her bed and start grabbing her, but thankfully Nell rescues her.
No, Theo.
Shirley's alternate reality is centered around the mysterious man who repeatedly raised a glass towards her. He was a man Shirley had slept with 6 years earlier at a conference, and she had never told her husband about it. Shirley has regretted what she did ever since, and the guilt has continued eating away at her. She eventually finds herself staring at her own wake, where she sees the consequences of her secret. Thankfully, Nell rescues her too.
Shirley.
By this point, all of the Crain children are awake and desperately trying to revive Luke. He is still foaming from his mouth after being poisoned, and the others know that they have to get him to a hospital as quickly as possible. But Luke remains trapped inside another reality, where the Red Room looks completely different. The room is now pristine white except for the red door, and he is surrounded by Nell, Abigail, and his mother, Olivia. Nell tries to convince him to leave, but Olivia wants him to stay. She keeps telling Luke that he wants to be there, but Luke insists that he does not. Eventually, adult Nell appears and touches Luke, bringing him back to reality.
No, I have to get.
Luke wakes up surrounded by Stephen, Theo, and Shirley, and they are relieved to see that he is alive. Luke immediately points towards the ghost of Nell and tells them that she saved him. The Crain siblings remain trapped inside the Red Room and try to understand why the room feels so familiar to all of them. Nell tells them to think of Hill House as a body and the Red Room as its stomach, because the house needed a place where the family could go, remain quiet, and slowly be consumed. For Shirley, the Red Room took the form of the family room. For Olivia, it was her reading room. For Luke, it was his tree house. For Stephen, it was his video game room. For Theo, it was her dance studio. And for Nell, it was her toy room. They had all spent time inside the Red Room without realizing what it really was. Suddenly, Nell disappears. The children are still trapped inside the Red Room while Hugh remains outside the door. He has been knocked unconscious, but when he wakes up, Poppy is there telling him another disturbing story. Before she can continue, the ghost of Olivia appears and tells Poppy to stop. Hugh tells her that the children are dying in there, but Olivia refuses to let them return to the real world because she believes that the outside world will destroy them. Hugh finally makes Olivia a promise. He tells her that if she simply opens the door, he will keep his word. Olivia agrees, and the red door finally swings open. Stephen and Hugh immediately carry Luke out of the room. As they begin moving down the staircase, Stephen suddenly stops. He sees something that makes him pause, but he does not explain anything. Instead, he looks at Hugh and then continues carrying Luke. They take Luke to the car, and Theo and Shirley prepare to drive him to the hospital. Hugh tells them that there is one more thing that he and Stephen need to do. Once the car drives away, Stephen asks his father what exactly he just saw, but Hugh does not get the chance to answer because another car arrives. The person who steps out is a younger version of Hugh. Stephen is suddenly able to see the night when Olivia died, exactly as it happened. He watches his younger father return to Hill House and find Olivia's lifeless body. Hugh is devastated by the discovery and begins mourning his wife while the Dudleys console him. They explain that they have come because their daughter Abigail is missing. The Dudleys continue searching for Abigail, and eventually they find her body inside the Red Room. They are immediately overwhelmed by grief, but then Abigail's ghost appears, allowing them to see that their daughter is still present in some form. Hugh then decides that the only way to end the nightmare is to burn Hill House down. But the Dudleys request him not to do it. They explain that almost nobody even knew they had a daughter because they had kept Abigail sheltered from the outside world. They tell Hugh that if he burns the house down, they will lose Abigail forever, and promise that they will never tell anyone what happened at Hill House as long as Hugh agrees not to destroy it. But Stephen now sees something shocking. It is revealed that the moment the red door opened, Hugh had already died, meaning that Stephen has been speaking to his father's ghost. As it turns out, Hugh's promise to Olivia was to accompany her in the afterlife, in return for opening the Red Room. Hugh returns to the Red Room and reunites with Olivia and Nell, while Stephen walks out of Hill House alone. Eventually, Mrs. Dudley dies and Mr. Dudley carries her to Hill House. Her ghost is reunited with Abigail and with the stillborn baby she had lost years earlier. Stephen returns to the home where his separated wife is living. He finally apologizes for the way he has behaved for so many years. He admits that he was the one living in denial and acknowledges that he had been seeing ghosts all along but could never accept what they were. The two eventually rekindle their relationship, and by the end of the story, Stephen's wife is pregnant. Shirley also works to repair her marriage after finally coming clean about the affair she had kept secret for 6 years. Theo eventually moves out of Shirley's guest house with the help of the woman who has now become something much more meaningful to her. Luke also manages to rebuild his life. He reaches 2 years of sobriety, and his brothers and sisters are there to celebrate the achievement with him. With the Crain family finally beginning to move forward, the story of Hill House comes to an end. The house remains standing, but the surviving Crain children are no longer trapped by the secrets, guilt, and denial that had followed them since childhood.